How's it going, everybody? Jared Lutz here, back with another Diablo IV video. This time we're going to be going over everything we learned from the most recent Campfire Chat that took place a couple days ago. This includes the reworks to elemental resist and damage stacking, and also the tuning of uniques and how the D4's team's philosophy behind uniques has changed. I'm going to take the 2-hour live stream and break it all down within a few minutes for you, and also clear up some confusion on certain things like the new damage stacking methods that will be introduced with the Season 2 update on October 17th. Just as a quick note, before we get into things, I did break down last week's Campfire Chat. Those videos can be found linked below. Those went over all the new content coming with Season 2 and all of the gameplay and quality of life updates coming as well, so check those out after this if you want a more cohesive breakdown of literally everything dropping with Season of Blood. With that being said, let's jump right into the newest information. The elemental resistances system is getting completely reworked. They used to be completely useless because of the negatives higher world tiers would put onto your resistances, plus armor in general just being way better, and also providing innate elemental resistance. With the previous system, elemental resists were inverse multiplicative. They gave the example here where if you have 20% poison resist, and then you get an additional 20%, instead of you adding those together and getting 40% resistance, you'd instead get 36% because there's diminishing returns. This allowed your resists to scale infinitely because you'd never be able to hit that 100% total resist amount. So what's changing here? Well, everything is going to be so much simpler. No more diminishing returns, no more multiplicative math. It's just easy to understand now, arguably the way it should have been. So starting with Season of Blood, elemental resist will be additive, meaning now 20% plus 20% will equal 40%. It all simply adds together. To go along with this, resistances will have a base cap at 70%, but it can go up to 85% with certain effects that will increase the cap. Armor will also now only resist physical damage. Both rings and amulets will have the all resistance affix. It used to be only amulets. Rings will have all resistances as well as an additional random resist. Blizzard says this will help create a baseline of resists for all players without having to specifically build into resists 100% of the time. They don't want players to immediately start new characters and instantly get hammered by elemental damage. The rest of your resistances will come via other gear, Paragon, your skill tree, etc. Now this change is great because it immediately makes itemization better, because now you care about resists as they become their own puzzle to try to solve, deciding as you level where you're going to grab the resists you need. Some other things Blizzard mentioned is that players should hit the 70% cap for most resistances around level 80. Now level 80 sounds high, but you also have to remember that the 1 to 100 leveling process in Season 2 is supposed to be 40% faster due to experience changes they've made, which we talked about in my previous video. They also have updated elixirs, so they give you an increase to your maximum resistance on top of everything else they provide. Moving on to uniques. Essentially what's happening here is that players and Blizzard feel that uniques are not really exciting enough, whether that be the fantasy they provide or the affixes, or they're just really weak, whatever the case may be. So they did a big pass and updated nearly every unique in the game, all of which can be found via the Season 2 patch notes, which I'll link in the description for you. We'd be here all day if I were to read through them all. In general, here's the kind of changes you can expect to see on the uniques across the game. First off being brand new stats that previously have never existed. An example of this being on the Fists of Fate unique gloves. They've removed the chance to heal on lucky hits and instead replaced it with an affix you don't see anywhere else, a chance to get an increase in damage on lucky hit. Larger existing stat ranges, for example on the Grasp of Shadow Rogue unique gloves, the plus 14 to 21% Shadow Clone damage is now going up to plus 31.5 to 52.5%, which is an increase of more than double. The goal here is to give uniques that more powerful feeling that they should have, considering uniques are meant to be the most powerful and rare items in the game. Overriding slot rules. For this they show off Hellhammer, where the plus 14 to 28% damage to burning enemies is going up to plus 42 to 70%, which is once again just a giant increase here. You can see it's also going to be getting ranks to upheaval as well. And lastly, updated unique effects, essentially making unique effects much easier to proc, making them less strict, and making them overall better. We see here with Ancient Oath that now instead of Steel Grasp slowing enemies hit, you'll now get a plus 30 to 50% multiplicative damage increase against enemies hit by Steel Grasp, making this unique substantially more powerful. Then the team went over a couple brand new uniques being added to the game next season, the first being the Flicker Step Boots. These are for any class, and their unique ability is that each enemy you evade through reduces your active ultimate cooldown by 2 to 4 seconds up to 10 seconds. It also has increases to movement speed, ultimate skill damage, and a damage reduction from close enemies, all of which makes sense for this unique. No wasted or pointless affixes here, which is something they mentioned working on. This might open the door for some ultimate focus builds. Next, they showed off a new rogue unique chest piece called Scoundrel's Leathers. Its ability states that while you have unlimited energy from Inner Sight, your core skills have a 64% chance to spawn Caltrips, Poison Trap, or Death Trap. It also gives you a big increase in trap skill damage and a damage reduction from enemies affected by traps. And lastly, they showed off this super cool unique amulet for druids called Dolmen Stone, which makes it so casting Boulder while Hurricane is active will cause your boulders to rotate around you. This is insanely cool. Mixing two skills together to create a fusion of the two is something I hope to see more from the team in the future. Next, we've got the unique drop list for each of the 5 new endgame bosses coming next season. If you haven't heard, unique item farming is coming in Season 2, both to the Seasonal Realm and the Eternal Realm. You'll be able to target farm uniques that you are looking for, and each boss has their own table of uniques that have increased chances of dropping from them, with Uber Duriel having the added chance to drop Uber uniques. So I'll just flash these up on screen so you can pause if you'd like. We've got the unique list for Grigwar, Varshan, Lord Zir, who is the new boss for the Season of Blood storyline, the Beast in Ice, and then lastly, good old Duriel. Moving away from uniques, let's talk about class improvements. First off, Fortify is changing. Instead of Fortify amounts being calculated from your base life, they'll now be based on your maximum life, so increasing your max life will increase the amount of Fortify you will gain. For Necromancer, Ossified Essence's damage bonus per essence past 50 is being reduced from 1% to 0.5%. Everyone saw a nerf coming a mile away here, so that isn't surprising. Bone Necros have been insanely strong, and the devs said that Ossified Essence is still a big contender for the strongest passive in the game, even after this change. They're also adjusting the Bone Graft Legendary Paragon node as well. For Barbarian and Druid, they've added some caps to limit infinite damage scaling, so Supreme Wrath of the Berserker maximum damage bonus is now capped at 100% multiplicative damage, and the Druid's aspect of the Raging Warbeast critical strike damage bonus is capped at 200%. Still very high amounts of multiplicative damage here, but the team is trying to limit any infinitely scaling damage variables for the future health of the game. Continuing on for Barbs, just some more general changes. They're upgrading a lot of the Paragon boards as many of them seem pretty weak. Berserking's damage bonus is now multiplicative instead of additive, so lots more damage potential there. Also, the Of Ancestral Force Legendary now grants bonus damage to the Quake and the base skill instead of having a separate damage range on the Quake. Some changes to Sorc include a reduction to Incinerate's ramp-up time from 4 to 2 seconds. Also, Enhanced Frozen Orb will now grant additional explosion damage against elites, as it was pretty weak on that front. And the Winter and Electrocute Paragon Glyphs now have practical uses on the Paragon board. Rogue is getting some basic skill buffs, things like Blade Shift Lucky Hit Chance being increased from 35 to 50%. Enhanced Blade Shift now gives the full 20% movement speed bonus immediately. Heartseeker Critical Strike Chance bonus increased from 3 to 5% per stack. And Forceful Arrow's Lucky Hit Chance is being increased from 40 to 50%. The Impetus passive's distance for damage buff is being reduced from 15 to 12 meters, and now increases the damage of your next non-basic attack. Druids are seeing some changes here to Ravens, buffing up their damage and critical strike chance, as well as changes to Rabies, making it spread faster and increasing the damage. Necromancer is getting a ton of minion buffs across the board, which you can see here. The Death's Defense passive, which basically makes your minions not die in one hit, is actually becoming a baseline for all minions in the game, including the Druid's pets, which is a nice change. Blood Golem, Iron Golem, and many of the minion Paragon nodes are also getting an overall increase in damage. The Coldbringer aspect now allows any skeletal mages to cast Blizzard instead of just only cold mages, and all the minion Thorns affixes are being merged into a single Minions Inherent Thorns affix, so you don't have to juggle a ton of minion Thorn affixes anymore. And now, shields have armor. Crazy that they didn't in the first place, but now they do, so there you go. Alright, now the last big change they talked about, damage buckets and the changes they are making in that regard. If you don't know how damage stacking and damage buckets work right now, that's okay because a lot of it is changing. The dumbed down version is that in order to get the best overall damage, you'd have to dip into every damage bucket in the game. So you'd have to work in vulnerable damage, some critical damage, along with all the other buckets because they all are multiplicative with each other. I have a video going over the way it works now if you are really curious, but like I said, a good portion of it is changing to be a lot easier to understand, as well as making it less necessary to build into everything. So what they are doing is changing how critical damage and vulnerable damage works. Instead of the entirety of their damage being multiplicative with each other, resulting in insane amounts of damage, now only their base damage is multiplicative, but anything you add on top of that base is not multiplicative. So at base, vulnerable enemies take 20% more damage multiplicatively. Any more vulnerable damage you stack onto it, whether it be from gear, paragon, or whatever, won't be multiplicative, it will be additive. Same with critical damage. This has a base of 50% multiplicative damage, but anything you yourself add to this will be additive. So at the end of the day, vulnerable and crits are still good because you're getting those base multiplicative values, but they aren't so incredibly insane that you go all in or stack everything into crits and vulnerable damage increases. Now you have more freedom to choose other things to build into, so hopefully with this change, not every single build will be built the same way, because before, every single build needed to focus on vulnerable and needed to focus on crits, or else it would never be a top build or a potent enough build. This was my main issue that I talked about in my damage stacking guide way back when. It just felt like every single build was just copy pasted across the board, across all classes, in terms of what you needed to have. I'm hoping this opens up the door for many more builds and much more build freedom. Also, to add to this, the way overpower damage is calculated has been adjusted, and the multiplicative base for overpower is 50%. They didn't say how overpower has exactly been changed because I guess it's quite confusing, so we're just taking their word for it here when they say it's going to be much more powerful starting next season. Now they did say that overall this change will lower damage numbers and damage output, but they also said to counter this, they've made a huge pass to enemy health to try to make it seem about the same as before, so we shouldn't see that big of a change in game difficulty, even though we'll be seeing lower damage values. We'll see how that plays out. Adding on to this, they didn't want to take this powerful multiplicative synergy away completely without giving anything potent back. Basically, they didn't want to make the game simpler by removing this damage stacking mechanic and doing nothing else. So they're adding in ways for the player to choose to invest in to get that multiplicative power back in more interesting ways that allow for more builds and potentially brand new builds to shine. You can see a few examples of this here, first with the No Witnesses legendary node for Rogue, where your ultimate skills gain an additional 60% multiplicative damage. This would combo very nice with the Flicker Step unique we talked about earlier. Also, Elemental Summoner for Sorcerer will now give your conjuration skills a 10% multiplicative reduced cooldown or mana cost. And they also deal bonus damage equal to 3% multiplicative of the total amount of your bonus damage with Fire, Lightning, and Cold, enabling the possibility of a full conjuration build or something using multiple conjuration skills. They're also adding 2 new Paragon glyphs per class that will allow for various legendary effects to scale, and they plan on doing more of this in the future. So here you have Rumble for Barbs for Earthquake, which comes with a multiplicative bonus, Stalagmite for Sorks for increased Ice Spikes damage, and Explosive for Rogues for Stun Grenade damage with a multiplicative bonus as well. Now, before I move on, I do want to mention that all the specific changes we've talked about here, things regarding class changes, updates to uniques, new multiplicative sources, things like that, are far from the complete list of changes and updates. These were just a small amount that they showed off. There's a huge, extensive list of everything in the patch notes that, once again, will be linked in the description for you. And the last thing we have to talk about is the patch coming after Season 2 launches, patch 1.2.1, which will be dropping near the end of October. They teased some of the changes coming with this patch, first being a training dummy that you can test builds and damage at, which is nice. This will be located in a cellar in Kjovashad, and you can change it to be multiple enemies or a boss or an elite enemy, etc. And also for this patch, we'll be getting a button that lets you completely reset your Paragon boards, which I know tons of people have been wanting. And then as far as future news and updates go, during BlizzCon, we'll apparently be getting a roadmap for future updates and content coming to the game, so that's exciting too. I'm sure there will be lots of cool news for Diablo IV that comes out of BlizzCon this year. Obviously, I will be covering all of that as well as any Diablo IV news that releases, so stay tuned for more future videos from me. And that's it for this Campfire Chat breakdown, the last before Season 2 begins. We're only a few days away now till Season of Blood, and I'm honestly pretty stoked to play again with all these new changes and additions coming. Anyways, thanks for watching, I appreciate it a lot. Subscribe for more Diablo IV news, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.